September 2023. The air smelled of damp earth and decay inside the abandoned Thornhill coal mine, 28 miles outside of Fayette County, West Virginia. State Trooper Rachel Bennett's flashlight beam pierced through 5 decades of darkness, illuminating what no one was supposed to find. Dispatch: I need backup at the old Thornhill site immediately and send the medical examiner. Her voice echoed against the cold limestone walls. What began as a routine safety inspection following reports of structural collapse had just become something else entirely. Something that would finally answer questions that had haunted Fayette County for 52 years. 2 sets of skeletal remains positioned side by side in a carefully constructed alcove deep within a sealed-off section of the mine. And nearby, a class ring from Beckley High School, graduation year 1969. The initials DP etched inside the band, the same ring David Patterson was wearing the night he vanished alongside his younger brother Thomas in August 1971. For more than half a century, the disappearance of the Patterson brothers had been nothing but questions without answers. 2 promising young men who simply vanished one humid summer evening after finishing their shift at Morrison's gas station. 2 empty chairs at every holiday gathering. 2 bedroom doors their father could never bring himself to pack up. Before we continue this shocking story, take a second to hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring these forgotten stories to light, and the algorithm gods will make sure you don't miss any future uploads. The discovery at Thornhill Mine wasn't just the end of a missing persons case. It was the first domino in a sequence that would expose decades of secrets buried in this small Appalachian community. Because when authorities finally identified a suspect and made an arrest in 2023, it wasn't a drifter or an unknown predator. It was someone the community knew, someone they trusted, someone who had walked among them for 52 years, carrying this terrible secret. The Patterson case represents more than just a solved mystery. It stands as a testament to the persistence of a family who never stopped searching, state troopers who refused to let the case file gather dust, and advances in forensic science that finally gave voice to victims long silenced. This is also a story about a divided community. When the brothers first disappeared in 1971, suspicion tore through Fayette County like wildfire. Neighbors accused neighbors, families stopped speaking. The search for David and Thomas Patterson revealed the fault lines running beneath the surface of small-town West Virginia. Lines that would crack wide open when the truth finally emerged 52 years later. What makes this case particularly haunting is how close the answer was all along. The key suspect had been interviewed in the original investigation but managed to slip through. For decades, this person attended community vigils for the missing brothers, looked their parents in the eye, and maintained a facade of innocence while harboring unimaginable secrets. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'm always fascinated to see how far these stories travel and how they connect us across distances. Tonight we'll walk through the events of August 1971, trace the decades-long search for answers, and reveal the stunning breakthrough that finally brought closure to one of West Virginia's most baffling cold cases. This is a story of loss, persistence, deception, and ultimately justice delayed but not denied. Fayette County, West Virginia, in 1971, was a place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. With just over 49,000 residents scattered across steep mountain hollows and small coal towns, it was a community where doors remained unlocked and children played in the streets until the porch lights came on. The county seat of Fayetteville, with its modest downtown perched on the edge of the New River Gorge, served as the beating heart of local commerce and gossip. The early 1970s had brought changes to this corner of Appalachia. The coal industry, which had built this region, was entering a period of mechanization and uncertainty. The Vietnam War had claimed the lives of 14 Fayette County boys and returned dozens more forever changed. Young people were beginning to leave for opportunities elsewhere, though many still stayed, bound by family and the only life they'd ever known. Economic anxiety loomed as traditional mining jobs began their slow transformation, though the local coal operations still provided steady work for those willing to brave the darkness underground. Times were changing, but the community held tight to its values of hard work, family, and looking after your neighbors. Morrison's gas station sat at the crossroads of Route 19 and County Road 41, its Texaco sign casting a red glow over the intersection each evening. The station served as more than just a place to fill up. It was a community hub where farmers discussed cattle prices over morning coffee, shift workers grabbed sandwiches before heading to the mines, and teenagers congregated after school, hoping someone with a car would offer an adventure. The small attached diner served hot meals and cold drinks, and the bulletin board inside held job postings, lost pet notices, and community event flyers. During hunting season, men gathered there before dawn to share tips about where the deer were moving. On Friday nights, it was where you heard the latest gossip before Sunday church services spread it further. It was at Morrison's that David and Thomas Patterson had found work in the summer of 1971, pumping gas, checking oil, and helping old Mrs. Morrison keep the place running after her husband passed away from black lung the previous winter. The brothers were reliable workers, showing up on time and never complaining about the long hours or the summer heat that made the asphalt shimmer. The Patterson brothers were well known throughout Fayette County, though for different reasons. David Patterson, at 23, was the responsible older brother. Standing 6'1" with sandy brown hair, he kept military short and steady gray eyes. He'd worked various jobs since graduating from Beckley High School in 1969. He'd considered enlisting after graduation, but his draft number never came up, and his father's declining health kept him close to home. David dreamed of becoming a civil engineer, spending his free time studying correspondence course materials and saving money for technical school. He kept a notebook where he sketched bridge designs and calculated load-bearing capacities. His bedroom walls were covered with diagrams and blueprints he'd drawn himself. Friends said David could look at any building or structure and tell you exactly how it was built and whether it would last. Thomas Patterson, younger by 4 years at 19, possessed the charm and easy smile that made him popular at Oak Hill High School, from which he'd graduated just 2 months before his disappearance. Tom, as everyone called him, stood 5'10" with the same sandy hair as his brother, but worn longer, touching his collar in a style that made their mother shake her head. He loved music, especially the rock and roll that filtered down from the cities, and played guitar at local church socials. Tom talked about heading to Nashville or even New York City someday, though those close to him suspected he'd never actually leave the mountains. He was the kind of person who made friends easily, always ready with a joke or a story that had people laughing. Those boys were different as night and day, but closer than any brothers I'd ever seen, recalled Dorothy Simmons, who managed the diner at Morrison's in 1971. David was the steady one, always thinking ahead. Tom lived in the moment, made everyone laugh. But they looked out for each other. David kept Tom grounded, and Tom kept David from being too serious. You rarely saw one without the other. The brothers came from good stock, as folks in Fayette County like to say. Their father, Walter Patterson, had worked 30 years at Thornhill Mine before a cave-in 1968, left him with a mangled leg, and ended his mining career. Their mother, Louise, worked as a seamstress from home, her Singer sewing machine humming late into the night as she altered wedding dresses and hemmed trousers for half the county. The family lived in a modest two-story house on Maple Street in Oak Hill, a house Walter's grandfather had built with his own hands in 1923. The wooden porch still bore the initials he'd carved into the railing. Inside, Louise kept everything spotless despite the constant battle against coal dust that seemed to seep into every home in the county. August 12, 1971, began as an ordinary Thursday. The temperature climbed to 87 degrees by noon, typical for an Appalachian summer. The brothers arrived for their afternoon shift at Morrison's at 2 p.m., having walked the 1.5 miles from their home. David wore his standard work uniform, jeans and a white t-shirt under the Texaco service shirt. Tom wore similar clothes but had tied a red bandana around his forehead to keep the sweat from his eyes. The shift was busy. Thursday was payday at several local mines, which meant men stopped for gas on their way home, eager to cash checks and see their families. The brothers worked efficiently, David handling the pumps while Tom managed the cash register and helped Dorothy in the diner during the dinner rush. A regular customer later told investigators he'd chatted with David around 6:30 p.m. about the upcoming football season. Tom had served coffee to a group of miners who sat at the counter swapping stories about a foreman everyone seemed to dislike. Nothing unusual, just another workday in small-town West Virginia. At 7:45 p.m., they clocked out. Their routine walk home took them down Route 19 for half a mile, then west on Oakwood Avenue through a residential area, past the First Baptist Church, and finally onto Maple Street. The route was well-traveled and familiar. They'd walked it hundreds of times before, sometimes racing each other, sometimes just talking about their plans and dreams. On that particular evening, witnesses reported seeing the brothers stop at Henderson's drugstore to purchase a birthday card for their mother, whose birthday was the following Sunday. The clerk, Margaret Ashworth, was the last known person to see the Patterson brothers alive. They seemed in good spirits, she told investigators. Tom was joking about something, making David laugh. They were debating whether their mother would prefer the card with roses or the one with mountains on it. Tom said she liked flowers, but David thought she'd appreciate the local scenery. They settled on the mountains. Left around 8:15, heading west on Oakwood. The distance from Henderson's drugstore to the Patterson home was approximately 15 minutes on foot. The evening was still warm, the sun just beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Other families were sitting on their porches, enjoying the cooling air after a hot day. When the brothers hadn't arrived home by 9 p.m., their mother began to worry. Louise knew her boys. They were punctual, especially David. If they were going to be late, they would have called from Morrison's or stopped by a neighbor's house to send word. By 10 p.m., she'd called Morrison's gas station and learned her sons had left over 2 hours earlier. The worry in her voice made Mrs. Morrison concerned too. By 11 p.m., Walter Patterson was driving the streets of Oak Hill despite his bad leg, searching for any sign of his boys. He stopped at friends' houses, checked the park where Tom sometimes played guitar, and drove the route they would have walked 3 times. At midnight, the Patterson family reported David and Thomas missing to the Fayette County Sheriff's Department. What time is it where you're watching? Let me know in the comments below. Day or night, someone somewhere is still searching for answers in cases just like this one. We thought they might have gone to a party or met up with friends, admitted former Deputy Gerald Collins in a 2022 interview. Two young men missing for a few hours on a summer night. We told the family to wait until morning. Looking back, that was our first mistake. Morning came with no sign of the brothers. No calls, no messages. Their beds remained undisturbed. By noon on August 13th, the Patterson family's concern had infected the community. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers gathered at the Patterson home, offering support and organizing search parties. The Fayette County Sheriff's Department, recognizing the seriousness of the situation, began interviewing potential witnesses and tracing the brothers' last known movements. The search expanded rapidly. Volunteers combed every inch of the route between Morrison's gas station and the Patterson home. They checked abandoned buildings, creek beds, and wooded areas surrounding Oak Hill. The local radio station, WOA, interrupted regular programming with updates and appeals for information. The DJ's normally cheerful voice took on a somber tone as he read descriptions of the missing brothers and asked anyone with information to come forward. It was unlike anything I'd seen before, recalled Oak Hill resident Margaret Brennan. Everyone dropped what they were doing to help search. The mines ran skeleton crews. Wives brought food to the volunteers. The high school postponed summer sports practice. Finding those boys became the only thing that mattered. By the third day, the West Virginia State Police had joined the effort. Troopers interviewed the brothers' friends, co-workers, and acquaintances. They examined David's bedroom, finding his correspondence school materials and savings passbook, over $600, untouched. Tom's guitar stood in its usual corner, his small collection of records stacked beside it. Nothing appeared out of place or missing except the clothes they'd been wearing and the birthday card they'd purchased. The most puzzling aspect of the case was the complete absence of evidence. No signs of struggle were found along their walking route. No suspicious vehicles had been reported in the area. The brothers had simply vanished into the summer evening, leaving no trace behind. It was as if they'd been plucked from the earth, Walter Patterson told reporters a week after the disappearance, his voice cracking. My boys wouldn't run away. They wouldn't leave their mother like this. Something happened to them, and someone knows what it is. As days turned to weeks, the search continued, but hope diminished. Posters with the brothers' photographs appeared in store windows throughout Fayette County and neighboring counties. Their smiling faces, David's serious and steady, Tom's bright and mischievous, looked out from the front page of the Fayette Tribune newspaper for 9 consecutive days. The moment the Patterson brothers were reported missing marked the beginning of Fayette County's Innocents Lost. Doors that had never been locked were now secured with deadbolts and chains. Young men who had walked freely were now given rides home. A community that had once prided itself on its safety now harbored an unseen threat, and the knowledge that 2 of their own had vanished without explanation. The first significant lead emerged on August 18th, 6 days after the disappearance. 3 separate witnesses mentioned seeing a dark green pickup truck idling near the First Baptist Church around the time the brothers would have been passing by. An elderly couple sitting on their porch, a teenager walking his dog, and the church janitor locking up for the evening, all described a mid-1960s model Chevrolet pickup with a damaged tailgate and mud-splattered sides. None could clearly identify the driver, though the teenager thought it might have been a man wearing a baseball cap or work hat. The description wasn't much, but it was the first real clue investigators had to work with. This green truck became the focus. A list was compiled of all green Chevrolet pickups registered in Fayette County and surrounding areas, 92 vehicles in total. Deputies began the painstaking process of locating each one, interviewing owners, and checking for signs of recent damage or suspicious behavior. The truck's owner was identified on August 23rd, 11 days after the disappearance. Vernon Hutchins, a 38-year-old mechanic who worked at the Thornhill Mine maintenance shop, admitted to being in the area that evening, but denied any involvement with the brothers' disappearance. "I was checking on a friend's house while he was out of town," Hutchins told investigators. "Stopped at the church because my engine was overheating, let it cool down, then went straight to my friend's place." His friend, though out of state at the time, later confirmed the house-sitting arrangement. With no evidence to contradict his account and no legal grounds for a search warrant, investigators were forced to accept Hutchins' explanation, though he remained on their informal suspect list. In the Patterson household, time stopped on August 12, 1971. The family calendar remained turned to that month for years. The date circled in red pencil, a silent testament to the moment their world shattered. For Walter and Louise Patterson and their youngest child, daughter Carol, who was 15 at the time, life became divided into two distinct periods, before the disappearance and after. Walter Patterson had always been a man defined by quiet determination. Born in these mountains to a coal mining family, he'd worked underground since age 18, accepting the dangers as part of mountain life. When the cave-in took his mobility, he'd adapted, taking work as a dispatcher for the mining company. When his sons vanished, it was the first problem he couldn't solve through hard work and persistence. 3 weeks after David and Thomas disappeared, Walter began his own effort to find them. Using his modest disability settlement and the family's meager savings, he transformed the garage into a command center. Maps of Fayette County covered the walls, red pins marking every location searched, blue pins indicating reported sightings, yellow pins highlighting areas still to be explored. Filing cabinets held meticulously organized notes on every person interviewed, every lead followed, every dead end encountered. A dedicated phone line, installed at Walter's expense, rang directly to this garage headquarters. The number appeared on homemade flyers distributed throughout West Virginia, Ohio, Virginia, and Kentucky. Walter's days followed a grueling routine. Mornings began at dawn with physical searches, difficult with his damaged leg, but he persisted, using a cane to navigate rough terrain. Afternoons were spent following up on tips and coordinating with the network of volunteers who continued to assist. Evenings were dedicated to updating his files and planning the next day's efforts. "Dad slept maybe 4 hours a night," Carol Patterson recalled in a 2023 interview. "Sometimes I'd find him at 3 a.m., sitting at the kitchen table studying maps or reading books about how to conduct proper searches. He taught himself to think like a detective because he believed the authorities had given up." While Walter channeled his grief into action, Louise Patterson turned inward, finding solace in faith and the unshakable belief that her sons would return. A devout Methodist, Louise attended services at First Baptist every Sunday and Wednesday, spending hours in prayer. She lit candles for her boys and kept their photographs on the altar at home. The living room became a shrine. Photographs of David and Thomas at various ages, arranged around a central portrait taken at Tom's high school graduation just months before they vanished. Louise dusted these pictures daily, talking to her sons as if they could hear her. Most heartbreaking was Louise's evening ritual. Each night at 8:15 p.m., the approximate time the brothers left Henderson's drugstore, she would set 2 places at the dinner table, complete with plates of food that would remain untouched until morning. She would then sit by the front window, watching Maple Street until exhaustion overtook her, waiting for her boys to walk through the door. "Mama never said they were dead," Carol explained. "Not once in all those years did those words cross her lips. She would say they were missing or away, but never gone forever. She kept their rooms exactly as they left them. She washed their sheets every week and hung fresh towels in their bathroom. She was ready for them to come home." For Carol Patterson, the aftermath brought a different kind of struggle. Overnight, she lost not only her brothers, but, in many ways, her parents as well. Dad was physically absent, always searching. Mama was emotionally absent, lost in her grief and hope. Carol had to grow up fast, taking care of herself while trying to support her parents. School became particularly challenging. In a small town where everyone knew their story, Carol faced constant reminders of her family tragedy. Some classmates avoided her, unsure what to say. Others asked invasive questions fueled by rumors and speculation. Teachers alternated between excessive sympathy and uncomfortable distance. Did your brothers run away? Did they join a cult? Did they get murdered? The questions came from everywhere, each one a fresh wound. Carol responded by withdrawing, throwing herself into her studies as an escape. She stopped attending school events. She ate lunch alone. She walked home quickly, head down, avoiding eye contact. She would eventually leave Fayette County for college in Pittsburgh, returning only for brief visits, unable to bear the weight of the community's collective grief and her parents' unending search. The extended family tried to help. Walter's brother came from Kentucky several times a year, bringing groceries and helping with home repairs that Walter neglected while focused on finding his sons. Louise's sister called every Sunday, listening patiently to the same stories about David and Thomas, offering comfort that seemed to help only briefly. But nothing could fill the void left by 2 young men who had simply walked into the evening and never returned. If you're finding this story as heartbreaking as I did, make sure you're subscribed to stay updated on more cases like this. These families deserve to have their stories told, and your support helps ensure these victims are never forgotten. Fayette County transformed dramatically in the decades following the Patterson brothers' disappearance. The rural coal community of 1971 gradually adapted to changing economic realities. By the 1990s, tourism centered around the new River Gorge brought new businesses and residents, forever altering the county's character. Morrison's gas station closed in 1989, the Texaco sign that had guided travelers finally going dark. It was replaced eventually by a modern convenience store chain where nobody knew anyone's name. Henderson's drugstore was absorbed by a national pharmacy in 1995. The wooden floorboards and personal service replaced by fluorescent lights and self-checkout lanes. The Thornhill mine ceased operations in 1985 amid falling coal prices and stricter safety regulations. The mine that had provided livelihoods for generations of Fayette County residents, including Walter Patterson, was sealed and abandoned. Concrete barriers were placed over the main entrances. Warning signs were posted. Slowly, vegetation covered the scars left on the landscape, reclaiming what the coal companies had taken. Through these changes, the Patterson case remained an unhealed wound in the community's psyche. The case wasn't entirely dormant during these decades. Every 5 years, like clockwork, media attention would resurface around the anniversary of the disappearance. These periodic spotlights typically generated new tips, most proving fruitless, but occasionally substantial enough to warrant renewed effort. In 1986, the case received its first major review when Sheriff Donnelly retired and was replaced by James Wilson, a former state trooper who'd worked on the original case. Wilson assembled a task force that spent 8 months re-examining evidence and re-interviewing witnesses. Their efforts yielded renewed focus on Vernon Hutchins, the mechanic with the green truck, but no new evidence emerged to justify charges. The 1990s brought advances in techniques that prompted another review. In 1997, FBI profilers created a psychological assessment of the likely perpetrator, suggesting the brothers' disappearance was probably the work of someone familiar with the area, who had specifically targeted them rather than a crime of opportunity. This profile narrowed the focus to local residents with connections to the Patterson family or the mining community, but produced no breakthrough. The advent of DNA analysis sparked hope in 2001, when law enforcement officials announced they would re-examine physical evidence using new techniques. Unfortunately, the limited evidence collected in 1971 had been improperly stored in a damp basement room, rendering most samples degraded beyond usefulness. The work glove found near the scene was tested but showed no connection to either brother. Cold cases are always challenging, but this one was particularly difficult, explained Detective Margaret Phillips, who led the 2001 review. We had no crime scene, minimal physical evidence, and witnesses whose memories had been clouded by 30 years. We were essentially starting from scratch 3 decades after the fact. The new millennium brought fresh eyes to the case when West Virginia established a cold case unit in 2009. The Patterson disappearance was among the first files reviewed. Investigators digitized the original case notes, created computer models of possible scenarios, and established a dedicated tip line with voicemail that family members checked religiously. By the 2010s, the case had taken on an almost mythical quality in Fayette County. Younger residents grew up hearing about the Patterson brothers without any personal connection to the events. Urban legends sprouted around the disappearance, tales of ghostly figures seen walking along Oakwood Avenue on August evenings, or mysterious voices heard near the sealed mine entrances. Some teenagers told stories of seeing 2 men matching the brothers' descriptions, hitchhiking on foggy nights. Others claimed to hear guitar music near the old Morrison's gas station location, even though the building had been demolished. The Patterson case had become part of local folklore, the details distorted through decades of retelling. For the Patterson family, however, there was nothing mythical about their continued suffering. Walter's health declined steadily, with heart problems and complications from his mining injury, leaving him increasingly frail. By 2015, he could barely walk even with his cane, but he kept the garage command center maintained until the very end, updating his maps and files whenever new information emerged. Louise's unwavering hope never dimmed, though her ritual of setting places at the table eventually reduced to special occasions only: Thanksgiving, Christmas, the boys' birthdays. Age had bent her body, but not her spirit. She refused to hold memorial services. She refused to say goodbye. Carol established a nursing career in Pittsburgh, visiting less frequently as the years passed. The weight of her family's tragedy made it difficult to return to Fayette County. Every street corner held memories. Every familiar face asked questions she couldn't answer. She loved her parents, but she couldn't save them from their grief. And trying was slowly destroying her too. What's the weather like where you are today? The Patterson family endured 52 years of changing seasons without answers. Through humid West Virginia summers, Crisp autumn evenings like the one when the brothers vanished, winter holidays marked by empty chairs, and spring days that brought renewal to everything except their hopes for resolution. September 17th, 2023. A warm autumn Saturday, the forest around the abandoned Thornhill mine ablaze with early fall colors. State Trooper Rachel Bennett wasn't thinking about the Patterson case as she conducted a routine safety inspection following reports of ground subsidence near the old mine entrance. At 29, Bennett was too young to remember the original disappearance. To her, it was just another piece of local history, a story told around dinner tables to remind people of darker times. She'd grown up in Charleston and transferred to Fayette County only 2 years earlier. She knew the basics of the case, but it wasn't personal to her. The Thornhill mine had been officially closed since 1985, its entrances sealed with concrete barriers and warning signs. But decades of neglect and natural erosion had compromised some of the seals. Recent heavy rains had caused a partial collapse near one of the secondary entrances, and Bennett had been dispatched to assess the damage and post updated warning signs. She expected a routine call, document the collapse, contact the state environmental office, and recommend the area be secured. Maybe 45 minutes of work, then back to the station to finish her shift. What she found instead would finally break open Fayette County's most notorious cold case. "I was examining the collapsed area when I noticed something odd," Bennett later testified. "Behind the fallen concrete and debris, there was a tunnel entrance that didn't appear on any of the safety maps I'd been given. It looked like it had been deliberately concealed, not just naturally blocked by the collapse." The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. Heavy timbers had been placed across it, then covered with rocks and concrete in a way that looked intentional. The recent collapse had dislodged some of this covering, creating a gap. Curious and concerned about safety hazards, Bennett carefully cleared enough debris to examine the hidden entrance. Using her high-powered flashlight, she spotted what appeared to be fabric deep within, weathered and faded, but clearly man-made. Her pulse quickened. She called for backup and the medical examiner, her voice steady but urgent. She knew what finding remains in an abandoned mine could mean, especially given the county's history. She secured the area with crime scene tape and waited, her mind racing through possibilities. 3 hours passed before a full team arrived. The remoteness of the location and the need to assemble proper personnel and equipment took time. FBI Special Agent Diana Foster arrived with the state forensic team, recognizing immediately the potential significance of the discovery. What they found inside that sealed tunnel would transform everything. The remains of 2 individuals, positioned side by side in a small alcove approximately 200 feet from the hidden entrance. Fragments of clothing still clung to the bones, remnants of what forensic analysts would later confirm were typical 1970s-era work clothes, denim jeans and cotton t-shirts. The fabric had deteriorated badly over 5 decades, but enough remained to analyze. And there, partially buried in the disturbed soil, a class ring from Beckley High School, graduation year 1969, with the initials DP etched inside the band. The gold had tarnished to a dark brown, but the engraving was still legible. "I knew immediately this was bigger than a routine call," Bennett said. "Every law enforcement officer in West Virginia knows about the Patterson brothers. The case is taught in the academy as an example of a cold case that haunts a community. Finding that ring, it was like coming face to face with history." The discovery site was immediately secured as multiple agencies descended on the abandoned mine. the West Virginia State Police, the Fayette County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI established a joint task force within 24 hours. The mine entrance became the center of the most significant forensic operation in county history. Recovering the remains proved challenging. The mine's unstable condition required structural engineers to reinforce the tunnels before evidence collection could begin. Wooden support beams had rotted. The ceiling showed signs of potential collapse. A team of forensic anthropologists from West Virginia University supervised the meticulous excavation, documenting the position of every bone, fabric fragment, and potential piece of evidence before anything was moved. The process took 4 days. Every handful of soil was sifted. Every inch was photographed and measured. The forensic team worked in shifts, careful not to disturb any evidence that might finally reveal what happened on that August night in 1971. The breakthrough that had eluded investigators for more than half a century had finally arrived. But identifying the remains, though DNA analysis quickly confirmed they belonged to David and Thomas Patterson, was only the beginning. The crucial questions remained. Who had hidden the brothers in this remote section of the mine? And how had they remained undiscovered for so long? The first answer came from the mine's historical records. The section where the remains were found had been part of an expansion project abandoned in early 1970 due to geological instability. According to company documents, that particular tunnel had been officially sealed in June 1970, 14 months before the brothers disappeared. This explained why searchers hadn't checked the area in 1971. It was presumed inaccessible, sealed off and marked as dangerous on all official mine maps. Someone with detailed knowledge of the mine's layout would have known about this hidden space. Someone with inside knowledge would have known this tunnel existed, explained FBI Special Agent Diana Foster. They would have known it was sealed off on company maps, but still physically accessible if you knew how to get there. This immediately narrowed our suspect pool. Individuals intimately familiar with Thornhill Mine operations. Hit the like button if you believe cold cases deserve more attention. Every case deserves resolution, no matter how much time has passed. The forensic examination of the remains yielded critical breakthroughs. Advanced DNA analysis confirmed what the class ring had already suggested. The remains were definitely David and Thomas Patterson. But it was the manner of death that provided the most significant clues. Both brothers had suffered similar fractures to the skull, consistent with blunt force trauma. The medical examiner determined these injuries were the likely cause of death, inflicted by a heavy object with a flat striking surface, possibly a wrench or similar tool common in mining operations. Microscopic analysis of the bone fractures indicated the fatal blows had been delivered from behind, suggesting the brothers had been attacked unexpectedly. They likely never saw their attacker coming. The positioning of the remains told investigators something important about the perpetrator's state of mind. They weren't simply dumped in the mine, explained Dr. Raymond Phillips, the forensic anthropologist who led the examination. They were deliberately arranged side by side. Their hands appeared to have been positioned together. This suggests the perpetrator knew them personally. There was a level of care in how they were placed that you don't typically see in random attacks. This detail was both comforting and disturbing to investigators. It suggested remorse, perhaps, but also meant the killer was likely someone close to the brothers or their family. Someone who felt enough connection to arrange them carefully, rather than just disposing of the bodies. Perhaps the most crucial evidence came from technology that hadn't existed in 1971. soil samples collected from around the remains contained microscopic fibers and trace elements that modern forensic techniques could analyze with extraordinary precision. Blue cotton fibers matched typical 1970s work clothes, confirming the brothers had been wearing their Morrison's gas station uniforms when they died. Red synthetic fibers were consistent with Tom's red bandana, the one he'd tied around his forehead to keep sweat from his eyes during his final shift. Pollen analysis indicated an August deposition consistent with their disappearance, providing a timeline that matched what investigators already knew. But it was the presence of a specific type of industrial lubricant, one used exclusively by Thornhill Mine for their equipment in the early 1970s, that provided the most significant lead. This particular lubricant contained a unique chemical signature. The company had used a proprietary formula developed by their maintenance department, different from standard commercial products. More importantly, access to this lubricant was restricted to specific personnel, primarily maintenance workers and supervisors who used it on drilling equipment and transport vehicles. The presence of this lubricant on the remains suggested the brothers had come into contact with mining equipment, or someone who worked extensively with that equipment shortly before or after their deaths. Cross-referencing employment records from 1971 with the list of persons of interest from the original case produced a name that had appeared only peripherally in the initial case files: Vernon Hutchins. Hutchins had worked as a maintenance supervisor at Thornhill Mine in 1971, responsible for equipment repairs and safety inspections. He would have had unrestricted access to all areas of the mine, including abandoned sections. He would have used that specific lubricant daily. His work schedule showed he had conducted a safety inspection of an area near the hidden tunnel on August 18, 1971, just 6 days after the brothers disappeared. And he owned a green Chevrolet pickup truck that had been seen near the First Baptist Church the night the Patterson brothers vanished. Vernon Hutchins had lived in plain sight for 52 years. At 90 years old in 2023, he had long since retired from Thornhill Mine, spending his later career as a maintenance supervisor at the County Public Works Department until 2005. He lived in the same modest ranch house on Cedar Ridge Road he'd purchased in 1969, just 3 miles from where the Patterson family had lived. His lawn was always meticulously maintained, trimmed every Saturday morning in summer. His garbage cans were brought in promptly after collection. His American flag was displayed with proper respect, raised at dawn and lowered at dusk. To his neighbors, Hutchins was the quintessential quiet elderly widower, his wife Betty having passed away from Alzheimer's in 2018 after a long, difficult decline. He attended the Methodist Church most Sundays, sitting in the same pew near the back. He volunteered occasionally at the county food bank, sorting canned goods and helping load boxes into recipients' vehicles. He was known to fix small engines and appliances for neighbors free of charge, his garage workshop filled with tools and spare parts. He was just part of the scenery, recalled Eleanor Davis, who lived 2 houses down. The kind of neighbor who waves when he's getting his mail but doesn't chat over the fence. He kept to himself mostly, but he was always polite. If you needed help with something, he'd lend you a tool or offer advice. Nobody ever suspected anything. What no one in Fayette County realized was that Vernon Hutchins had been hiding in plain sight, carrying the secret of the Patterson brothers' fate while participating in the very community their disappearance had traumatized. The arrest came at dawn on October 3, 2023, 16 days after the discovery at Thornhill Mine. a tactical team from the West Virginia State Police surrounded Hutchins' home while he slept, using loudspeakers to order him outside. Neighbors described their shock at seeing the elderly man emerge in his bathrobe, hands raised as officers in tactical gear secured him and placed him in handcuffs. "I thought there must be some kind of mistake," said Robert Williams, who lived across the street. "Vernon was just a regular old guy, quiet, kept his property nice. The idea that he could have killed those boys back in 1971, it didn't make sense. None of us could believe it." By noon, news of the arrest had spread throughout Fayette County like wildfire. The state police called a press conference for 2 p.m., but well before the official announcement, social media was ablaze with speculation and disbelief. Many residents initially assumed there must be some mistake. Vernon Hutchins seemed too ordinary, too integrated into the community to be responsible for the county's most notorious crime. But others remembered small details that suddenly took on new meaning. The way Hutchins had always avoided discussing the Patterson case when it came up in conversation. The way he'd sold his green pickup truck in 1972 and bought a different vehicle. The way he'd volunteered for search parties in 1971, but always seemed to direct them away from the areas near Thornhill Mine. Colonel Michael Stevens of the West Virginia State Police, flanked by FBI representatives and the county prosecutor, confirmed what many found difficult to comprehend. Vernon Hutchins had been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of David and Thomas Patterson. The community's reaction was immediate and visceral. "It was like a collective gut punch," described Fayette Tribune editor Patricia Morrison. "Everyone had their theories about the Patterson case. Drifters, strangers passing through, even organized crime. No one imagined it could be someone who'd been among us all along, someone who'd fixed our lawnmowers and attended church beside us for 50 years. The search of Hutchins's home yielded the physical evidence needed to secure an indictment. In a locked metal box in his basement workshop, investigators found David Patterson's high school letterman's jacket, which had been missing from his bedroom, but never officially reported to police as part of the missing items. Forensic analysis confirmed microscopic blood residue on the jacket belonged to David. The jacket had been carefully folded, preserved almost like a keepsake. Also in the box was a St. Christopher medal that Thomas had worn, a graduation gift from his mother, confirmed through photographs and Louise Patterson's tearful identification. Most damning was a maintenance log from Thornhill Mine, apparently stolen from company records, documenting the sealing of various tunnels between 1969 and 1971. Hutchins had annotated the margins with notes about access points and depth measurements, suggesting he had identified the hidden tunnel as a concealment location well before the murders occurred. The forensic evidence combined with Hutchins' documented access to Thornhill Mine created a compelling case, but it was modern technology applied to old evidence that provided the final irrefutable link. The green Chevrolet pickup truck that witnesses had reported seeing near the First Baptist Church the night of the disappearance had been sold by Hutchins in 1972. Investigators in 2023 managed to track down the vehicle, now owned by a collector in Kentucky who'd restored it as a vintage showcase piece. Although the truck had been repainted and restored multiple times over the decades, forensic technicians using advanced chemical analysis discovered microscopic traces of blood in crevices beneath the seat-mounting brackets. Blood that DNA testing confirmed belonged to both Patterson brothers. This evidence suggested the brothers had been transported in Hutchins' truck after being attacked, likely already deceased or unconscious. The blood pattern indicated they had been placed in the truck bed, then moved to the mine. For the Patterson family, the arrest brought a complex mixture of emotions that no single word could capture. Relief, anger, grief renewed after decades of living with uncertainty. Walter Patterson had passed away in 2019 at age 94, never knowing the truth about what happened to his sons. He'd spent his final years in declining health, his mind still sharp, but his body failing. Even on his deathbed, he'd asked Carol if there was any news about David and Thomas. Carol had held his hand and said they were still looking. She couldn't bear to tell him they'd likely never know. Louise Patterson, now 96 and in a nursing home with advanced dementia, could not comprehend the news when Carol tried to explain it. Her mind had retreated to earlier, happier times. Most days she thought David and Thomas were still children, playing in the backyard. Sometimes she asked when they'd be home for dinner. Carol didn't correct her anymore. Let her have that peace, she thought. Carol herself, now 67, faced for the first time the man who had stolen her brothers and destroyed her family. She attended Hutchins' arraignment, sitting in the front row of the courtroom, staring at the elderly man in the orange jumpsuit. In a brief statement to the press afterward, she expressed gratitude to Trooper Bennett for her discovery and to the forensic teams for their diligence, but noted with controlled anger. There is no arrest, no conviction, no punishment that can restore what was taken from us. But perhaps now my parents can finally rest, and my brother's story has an ending. The trial of Vernon Hutchins began in March 2024. Due to his age and health concerns, proceedings were modified with frequent breaks and shorter court days, but prosecutors were determined to see justice served. The prosecution presented a methodical case, building a timeline that connected Hutchins to the brothers through both physical evidence and witness testimony. Former co-workers testified about Hutchins's access to all areas of Thornhill Mine and his extensive knowledge of abandoned tunnels. Several recalled him mentioning the sealed section where the bodies were found, saying it was a shame good tunnel space had gone to waste. Forensic experts explained in careful detail how modern technology had revealed evidence overlooked in 1971. They described the unique chemical signature of the mine's proprietary lubricant and how its presence on the remains connected directly to Hutchins' daily work. Mechanical engineers demonstrated using diagrams and models how Hutchins could have accessed the sealed tunnel using his knowledge and the tools available to maintenance supervisors. It would have taken planning, but it was absolutely possible. The defense, recognizing the overwhelming evidence against their client, focused primarily on Hutchins's age and deteriorating health. His attorneys argued that prison would be unnecessarily cruel for a 90-year-old man with heart problems and diabetes. They presented medical records showing he required daily medication and had limited mobility. They didn't seriously contest his guilt. They couldn't. The evidence was too strong. Instead, they asked for mercy based on his age and the time that had passed. Hutchins himself remained largely silent throughout the proceedings, showing no visible emotion even when confronted with the most damning evidence. When crime scene photos were displayed, he stared straight ahead. When Carol Patterson gave her victim impact statement, describing 52 years of her family's suffering, his expression never changed. He declined to testify in his own defense, exercising his Fifth Amendment right. His attorneys advised against it, knowing the prosecution would destroy him on cross-examination. After 8 hours of deliberation spread over 2 days, the jury returned with unanimous guilty verdicts on both counts of first-degree murder. Several jurors were crying as the verdicts were read. The jury foreman's voice shook as he announced their decision. Judge Catherine Morrison sentenced Hutchins to 2 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. She noted that while his advanced age meant he would likely die in prison regardless of the sentence, the consecutive terms symbolically acknowledged the separate value of each young life he had taken. "No passage of time diminishes the gravity of this crime," Judge Morrison stated during sentencing. 2 promising lives were cut short. A family was shattered. A community lost its innocence. Justice may have been delayed, but it will not be denied. Vernon Hutchins died in prison 7 months later, in November 2024, from complications related to pneumonia and heart failure. He was 91 years old. He never expressed remorse, never offered a full explanation, never provided the Patterson family with answers to their lingering questions about why he targeted their sons or what exactly happened that August night. He took those details to his grave, leaving behind only the evidence that convicted him. This case proves justice can come even after 52 years. What cold case do you think deserves more attention? Comment below. Every unsolved case represents a family still waiting for answers. Carol Patterson established a foundation in her brothers' names in early 2025, dedicated to supporting cold case investigations across West Virginia. The Patterson Brothers Cold Case Foundation provides grants for advanced forensic testing and specialized training for rural law enforcement agencies, ensuring that other families might find answers sooner than hers did. "If Dad were alive, this is what he'd want," Carol said at the foundation's launch. "He spent his life searching. Now we can help others who are still searching. Maybe we can prevent another family from waiting 52 years for answers." The foundation's first grants funded DNA testing for 3 other West Virginia cold cases and paid for 2 sheriff's deputies to attend advanced forensic training. The goal is to eventually expand to help families throughout Appalachia, where rural law enforcement agencies often lack resources for sophisticated forensic work. The Patterson case has become a template for cold case investigations nationwide. Law enforcement agencies study how modern technology applied to preserved evidence can solve decades-old crimes. The FBI now includes the case in training materials, highlighting both the failures of 1971 and the persistent determination that eventually brought resolution. Detective programs across the country use the Patterson case to teach about the importance of proper evidence storage, thorough initial investigations, and never giving up on cold cases no matter how much time has passed. In Fayette County, the case has transformed community awareness in meaningful ways. The high school curriculum now includes a unit on community safety and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior, regardless of who is involved. Students learn about the Patterson brothers and how an entire community failed to see what was hiding in plain sight. Annual memorial scholarships in David and Thomas Patterson's names are awarded to students pursuing careers in criminal justice and forensic science. The awards come with a plaque bearing the brothers' photographs and a quote from Walter Patterson: "Never stop searching for truth." The old Thornhill mine has been permanently sealed, with a memorial placed near the entrance honoring David and Thomas Patterson. The bronze plaque shows their faces at ages 23 and 19, forever young, and bears an inscription: "Found after 52 years. Justice delayed but not denied. May their memory inspire persistence in seeking truth." On the anniversary of their disappearance each August, community members gather at the memorial for a brief ceremony. Carol attends when her health permits, along with extended family members and residents who remember the original search. They light candles, share memories, and remind each other that some wounds never fully heal but can at least find closure. The case changed how Fayette County sees itself. The community that once prided itself on knowing everyone had to confront the reality that evil can wear a familiar face and a friendly smile. That lesson, painful as it was, has made residents more vigilant and more willing to question when something seems wrong. Louise Patterson passed away peacefully in her sleep in January 2025, 3 months after Hutchins died in prison. She never fully understood that her sons had been found or that their killer had been brought to justice. In her final months, she spoke often about David and Thomas as if they were still young boys, still alive somewhere, still coming home someday. Carol arranged for her mother to be buried between her sons at Oak Hill Cemetery, the grave she'd refused to prepare for 5 decades, finally accepting her. The headstone reads, "Together again, forever loved, forever remembered." The Patterson case reminds us that justice has no expiration date, that families deserve answers no matter how much time has passed, that advances in technology can breathe new life into cases once thought unsolvable, and that sometimes the breakthrough comes from unexpected places: a routine safety inspection, a collapsed tunnel, a trooper doing her job on an autumn afternoon. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates true crime stories. Your support helps bring attention to cases that might otherwise be forgotten. Behind every cold case is a family that never stopped hoping, never stopped searching, never stopped believing that truth would eventually emerge from darkness. The Patterson brothers walked into a summer evening in 1971 and disappeared. It took 52 years, but they finally came home. Their story is finished. But for other families still waiting, still searching, still hoping, the work continues.